The stars were quiet that night above Earth, but the silence did not last because a signal came from far beyond the solar system, and it came without warning, a voice, not in anger and not in fear, but in peace. It was a message from the stars, speaking a language that no one had ever heard before, but somehow everyone understood. It said they were called the Thexari, and they came in peace. They claimed to come from a distant empire, one far older than Earth, one that had watched humanity grow from a distance. They said they had waited for this day for a long time. They had seen the wars and the pain and the unity that came after, and now they offered Earth a place in their great alliance, a seat at their ancient table, not as servants, but as equals. The world listened, and the people wondered, and the leaders gathered in silence, unsure of what to do, because no one had expected this. Not yet, not now. Earth had always wondered if life was out there, but now life had knocked at the door and waited with a smile. The message was clear and simple. The Thexari wanted a meeting in neutral space near the outer orbit of Saturn. They said they would send a small ship with unarmed diplomats, and they asked Earth to send a ship as well. No weapons, no fleets, only peace. The United Nations called an emergency session, and every screen in every capital lit up with the same question: do we trust them? Some said, yes, this could be the start of a new future. This could mean trade. This could mean knowledge. This could mean peace across the stars. Others were not so sure. They pointed to history and old lessons of what happened when a weaker people trusted a stronger one too quickly. They said Earth must be careful. They said Earth must be ready. In the end, Earth agreed to meet, but with caution. They chose a ship small and sleek, painted white with symbols of peace along its hull. The shuttle carried no weapons, just a pilot and a translator and a message of hope. They called it the Dove. The Dove lifted into the sky and passed beyond Mars and Jupiter and made its way towards Saturn, to the place where the Thexari had said they would wait. But in deep space, things do not always go as planned, and not all truths come in peace. The pilot of the Dove was a young woman named Kira, strong and calm with eyes that never missed a detail. She watched her screens closely, and at first there was nothing, just stars and silence and the faint hum of the engines. But then she saw something strange, a ripple near one of Saturn's moons, a shimmer in the black, a wave of color where there should be none. She slowed the ship and turned her scanners toward it, and what she saw made her blood run cold. There were ships hidden, there many ships, big ships, dark ships. They floated in silence like sharks in deep water, their hulls covered in strange black metal with no lights, no markings, no signals. They were not part of the peace mission. They were not diplomats. They were a fleet, and they were waiting. Kira sent a message back to Earth. Quickly, her voice steady but urgent, she told them what she saw and warned them that this was not what it seemed. The Thexari had not come to make friends. They had come with teeth. Earth went silent for a long moment, and then the sky above the planet began to move. From under the seas, from inside the mountains, from hidden bases, long-forgotten systems began to wake. Earth had prepared for this once long ago when the stars were quiet and the future was unknown. They had built something powerful, something terrible, something ancient. They had called it Project Leviathan. Leviathan was not a fleet, and it was not a shuttle. It was one ship, but it was the most powerful ship Earth had ever built. It had no flags and no welcome lights. It had no songs and no soft words. It was not made for diplomacy. It was made for one thing, only survival. The ocean split, and the water roared, and from the deep rose a shape unlike any other, massive and cold and silent. It lifted into the sky like a ghost wrapped in fire. The people of Earth watched in silence as the Leviathan took to the stars, leaving behind only mist and thunder. It said nothing as it passed the moon, and nothing as it reached Mars, but the stars seemed to shift in its path, as if even the light bent to let it pass. The Thexari sent another message, still claiming peace, still offering smiles, still pretending they had not been seen. But Earth did not reply with words. They sent coordinates and nothing more, and the Leviathan turned toward them with purpose in its engines and fire in its heart. The people of Earth did not cheer, and they did not cry. They simply waited, because now they knew. Peace is not always a gift, and words are not always true. Sometimes peace is only possible when strength stands behind it. And sometimes the only answer to a false offer is a true warning. They wanted diplomacy, but Earth remembered its history. And this time, they would speak with a warship. The Leviathan moved through space like a shadow born from fire. Each part of its black metal hull told a story of Earth's past pain, fear, survival, and strength. The engines left a blue trail, glowing like lightning through the cold silence of the void. The people of Earth watched in silence as it traveled far beyond Saturn, carrying their warning, carrying their promise. Kira still floated near the edge of the Thexery meeting zone, her shuttle hidden behind one of Saturn's smaller moons, her eyes wide as she saw the fleet that waited for her. Not one ship, not two, but dozens long black vessels shaped like blades with no markings, no signal, and no mercy. She had seen warships before in training and in simulations, but never like this, never so quiet, so still, so patient, like spiders sitting on a web made of stars. Thexery voices filled her screen, soft and warm, trying to calm her, try to explain that the fleet was a misunderstanding, that the ships were there for defense, only that they were a sign of respect for Earth's power, not a threat. But Kira knew lies when she heard them, and this lie sounded too sweet, too smooth, too perfect. Back on Earth, command centers buzzed with movement. Generals and scientists spoke in hushed voices. Leaders gave quiet orders, but they all knew that the time for speeches was over. They had trusted too much and too quickly, and now they had only one answer to give, not with words, but with the Leviathan. The warship reached the edge of Saturn's orbit and stopped. The Thexery fleet began to move slow at first, then faster as the ships turned to face the single human vessel. They still sent messages, still offered friendship, but now their voices sounded strained, less friendly, more commanding. Behind their words was fear, and behind that was anger. One of the Thexery ships fired a warning beam, a thin line of white light, aimed near the Leviathan's path. Not a direct hit, but a message, a sign that they were not afraid, that they were still in control. The beam struck nothing and vanished into space. The Leviathan responded not with a beam, not with a word, but with silence. And in that silence, the stars seemed to grow colder. Then it moved. It did not fire first, and it did not run. It simply turned toward the center of the Thexery formation and began to glide forward without rush, without fear, without sound. The black hull shimmered with patterns as its ancient systems came to life for the first time in 100 years. The Thexery fleet opened fire. Beams and missiles and sonic waves filled the space between them. The sky near Saturn lit up with color, with fire, with destruction, but nothing touched the Leviathan. Nothing even came close. The human warship moved like it already knew where every attack would land, like it had danced this dance before in another war, in another time. Then it struck. The Leviathan unleashed its first weapon, a pulse of energy that rippled through space, not to destroy, not to kill, but to blind. The Thexery systems shut down sensors, burned out engines, froze in place, as if the ship had pulled darkness itself around them. Then came the second strike, this time more direct. A bolt of light, shaped like a spear, tore through the largest of the Thexery cruisers, cutting it open like paper, but with perfect precision. The crew inside survived unharmed, floating in silence as their ship came apart, without fire, without sound. Panic spread through the alien fleet. Ships tried to move, tried to escape, but the Leviathan had already moved again, now behind them, without a sound, without warning. Another pulse, another strike, this time disabling weapons, this time freezing guidance, this time saying one thing louder than any words: "You are not in control." Kira watched from her small ship, heart pounding, as the impossible unfolded before her eyes. She knew the Leviathan was powerful, but this was something more. This was legend turned real. This was myth made metal. On Earth, every screen, every station, every eye was locked on the feed as the battle, or what was left of it, played out in silence. A war without words, a message written in movement and light. The Thexery fleet began to retreat. The ships that could still move turned and fled. Some left signals behind, promises of return, threats of revenge, but they were weak and hollow. The Leviathan did not follow. It simply hovered in silence, its hull dark, once more like a shadow watching, waiting. The message had been sent, and across the stars others heard it. Two empires and coalitions who had watched Earth from a distance now looked closer, now wondered, now feared. The humans who once begged for peace now stood alone in power, with weapons none had seen before and the will to use them. Kira's shuttle returned to the Leviathan, docking silently inside the ship's hangar. Lights dim and comm systems greeted her, not with cheers, not with voices, but with warmth and quiet approval. as if the ship itself understood what she had done, what Earth had done. She walked through the corridors alone and felt the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. The Leviathan was not just a ship, it was a promise, one that Earth had made long ago, a promise that if the stars ever turned dark again, humanity would not run, it would rise. Back on Earth, the leaders spoke again, but now they spoke with new words, words shaped by fire and silence. They did not ask for peace, and they did not call for war. They said only this Earth is awake, Earth is ready, Earth remembers. The stars would remember too, because the next time someone asked for diplomacy, they would think twice before lying. They would think twice before bringing a fleet. They would think twice before forgetting what it meant to face the last warship of Earth. The Leviathan drifted through the cold silence of space, its engines now dim, its hull quiet. As if sleeping after a long dream, Kira stood at the viewing deck, her eyes fixed on the stars, and her thoughts heavy with questions. She had never been in real combat, never seen war with her own eyes, and yet what she had witnessed was something far beyond war. It was a statement. Thexery fleets had vanished, their last signal sent in panic, their words filled with denial and confusion. They could not believe what they had seen. They had not expected resistance. They had not believed Earth could defend itself. They had thought humans were young, foolish, unprepared. Now they knew the truth. Earth was not only ready, it was waiting. Across the galaxy, whispers moved faster than ships. Rumors of the battle near Saturn spread like wildfire. Some said the humans had used forbidden tech. Others said the Leviathan was not a ship, but a living weapon made from dark matter and starfire. Others still claimed Earth was protected by old gods reborn in steel. None of them knew the truth, and Earth said nothing. Back on the Leviathan, Kira received a message. It was brief and direct. Earth Command wanted her to remain in deep orbit. The ship was now a signal, not just a tool, a flag planted in the stars, telling all who watched that the line had been drawn. But Kira felt something else, something stirring inside the ship, like a breath, like a heartbeat. The Leviathan was not just a machine. Its walls carried memories. Its systems had learned and grown over time. It had been alone for too long, and now, awakened, it had purpose. Deep within its core, old logs began to replay. Old voices echoed through the halls. Engineers, scientists, commanders, all long gone, their words layered with warnings, with hope, with fear. They spoke of a time when Earth stood on the edge, when enemies had gathered, when peace had become a fragile dream. That was when a Leviathan had been built not for conquest, not for power, but for the last stand, a final line no one could cross. And now it had risen not in war, but in warning. In a distant sector of space far from human eyes, the Thexery High Command gathered, their faces twisted in anger and confusion. They demanded answers from their scouts, from their spies, from their advisors. No one could explain how Earth had hidden such a weapon. No one knew how the humans had kept it secret. No one had ever imagined they could strike so fast, so clean, so strong. The council split. Some wanted revenge, others wanted silence. The oldest among them spoke of legends of ancient races who once hid their power until it was too late to stop them. They feared that Earth was not young, but waiting. Meanwhile, Kira explored deeper into the Leviathan, its halls wide and dark, lined with panels that glowed softly. As she passed, each step brought new rooms, new secrets, training decks, weapon bays, simulation cores, all untouched since the ship had gone to sleep decades ago. She found the control core, at last, a vast chamber filled with holograms, data streams, floating symbols and languages she barely understood. The ship spoke, then its voice calm and steady, not male, not female, but something in between, something human, and not. It said, "Welcome," and it called her captain. Kira hesitated. She was not meant to lead. She was only a scout, a messenger, a pilot. But the Leviathan had no crew now, and its systems had chosen her. The ship remembered her bravery, her calm, her decision to stay when others would run. It showed her visions not of war, but of preparation, blueprints, tactics, records of past threats, of near destruction. Earth had been close to falling once, and in response, it had built this not to strike first, but to ensure it would never fall again. Suddenly, a signal reached the Leviathan, a strange pulse hidden beneath normal channels. It was not Thexery. It came from deeper space, unknown code, unknown origin, but it repeated the same three symbols over and over, old symbols once used in Earth's early space days, a warning, a flare, a request for help. Kira sent the data to Earth Command and waited their reply. came quick and short: investigate, but stay hidden, do not engage. She plotted a course, and the Leviathan moved once more slow and silent past the edges of known space into the dark between stars where old signals died and forgotten machines drifted. As they neared the source, the Leviathan detected debris fields, broken stations, scattered satellites. Something had happened here long ago, a battle, maybe, or a collapse, but no clear answers, only ruins, and the signal still pulsing steady and patient. Then they saw it. A small ship barely holding together, its hull cracked, its lights fading, life signs weak. But present Kira ordered the Leviathan to extend docking arms, and bring it in. The process was slow but careful. The ship did not resist inside. They found two survivors, human, barely conscious, their suits marked with the old logo of a colony project lost many years ago. Kira brought them aboard and ran medical scans. They were malnourished, dehydrated, but alive. They had a story, one filled with pain, with betrayal. They spoke of a colony built in secret, then abandoned when the company funding it collapsed, left to survive alone until something found them, something not human. Their attackers were not Thexery. They were something worse, something silent and patient, creatures that did not speak, did not ask, only took ship's people data, whatever they wanted, then left nothing behind. The survivors had sent signals for years, hoping for rescue, and the Leviathan was the first to answer. Earth Command was shocked. They believed all lost colonies had been accounted for. They demanded every detail. Kira gave them everything, and then she made a request: let her stay, let the Leviathan continue to search for others, to be not just a weapon, but a light in the dark. Permission was granted. And so the Leviathan became more than a warship, more than a symbol. It became a guardian, drifting through the stars, not with fire, but with purpose, not with fear, but with resolve. Because now Earth knew the stars were not empty, the lies were not over, and peace would not come easy. But they had something more powerful than hope. They had the last warship, and it had chosen to fight for more than just Earth. It had chosen to protect all who needed it, even in the darkest corners of space. The Leviathan moved silently beyond the edge of charted space, its hull gliding past broken satellites and dust clouds lit only by distant starlight. Inside the ship, Kira studied new signals, faint and scattered like whispers between worlds. Each one carried traces of something not human, not friendly, not Thexery either. This was something older, colder, something watching. The two survivors from the forgotten colony were resting in the med bay, their eyes wide. When awake, their sleep filled with tremors. They spoke little, but what they shared painted a dark picture. They had seen the enemy only in shadow shapes, with too many limbs, eyes that reflected light like glass. No sounds, no language, only action. They came without warning, took who they wanted, and vanished again like ghosts wearing machines. Kira knew the Leviathan could handle a battle. She had seen it outthink and outmaneuver the Thexery without effort. But this felt different. This was not war with rules and power. This was something else, something that did not care for talks or fear or even understanding. It simply wanted. Earth Command ordered her to continue mapping the signals, to find the source, and observe only if safe to engage, only if attacked to retreat if needed. But inside her chest, Kira felt the ship pull forward like it already knew something deeper than orders, a sense of duty beyond command. The Leviathan's systems pulsed with new data shapes forming in its central core, outlines of structures hidden behind radiation storms, cloaked in nebulae forgotten by maps and untouched by probes, ancient stations built by known species abandoned, yet still running like hearts without bodies. The energy readings were strange, not just power, but distortion, time lag, gravity fluctuation, things that made no sense even to the advanced sensors of the ship. One of the signals grew stronger. It pulsed with rhythm, a message, maybe a warning or a trap. Kira locked it in and ordered a slow approach. The Leviathan moved through a thick cloud of space dust, its lights dimmed, its engines nearly silent. It approached the signal and found a structure floating alone, black metal covered in growths, not plant, not text, something in between. The shape was unnatural, angles that hurt the eyes, curves that never ended. No response came from the station, no defense, no greeting, only the pulse steady like a heartbeat or a countdown. Kira launched a probe and watched as it drifted closer, The moment it touched the surface, the station reacted. Lights flickered, doors opened, shapes began to move inside, not fast, not hostile, just present, like something waking up. The probe fed back video, broken and blurry, strange symbols flashed on the walls, lines of light crawled along the floor and ceiling in slow waves. Kira enhanced the feed and saw movement, not machines, not people, but forms crawling slowly on too many limbs, their eyes glowing faint like embers in ash, their movements slow and careful like they were waiting for something. Earth Command ordered a full scan, then retreat, too risky, too unknown, but before Kira could pull back, the station sent out a wave, not physical, not energy, but something else, a feeling that passed through the ship like a whisper, a voice, without sound, a question, without words. The Leviathan froze just for a second, then responded, not with weapons, not with shields, but with memory. It played a signal from long ago, Earth's first colony cry for help, a voice that once begged the stars for mercy and was never answered. The station pulsed again, and this time the message was clear. It remembered. Not the colony, not the people. It remembered the pain, the loneliness, the fear. It had fed on it, had watched it, had waited. The creatures inside were not builders, they were gatherers, feeding on memory, pain, fear. They did not destroy, they absorbed and remembered. They were ancient, hungry collectors of suffering. Kira pulled the probe back and ordered full retreat. The Leviathan obeyed instantly, engines flaring as the station began to react, its walls shifting, its lights growing brighter. The creatures within now moving faster, still not attacking, but watching, following, recording. As the Leviathan sped away, another signal lit up nearby. This one, not from a station, but from a ship, not human, not Thexery, but close, readable, familiar. It was a distress signal from a scout vessel marked as Solark 7, a ship Earth had lost 20 years ago in an exploration mission. It had vanished near the edge of map space, and now its signal was calling for help. Kira locked on and moved the ship fast, but careful. The scout was drifting near a gas giant, its engines offline, its hull intact, but scarred by strange patterns like veins of metal melted and reformed. The Leviathan scanned and found one life sign, barely stable, human. They pulled the scout into the docking bay and opened the airlock slowly. Inside was a man in his 50s, uniform, faded, eyes hollow. He looked at Kira and whispered one word before falling unconscious. Watchers. The medbay worked fast. The man was stable, but weak, his mind trapped in flashes of memory. He spoke in broken sentences, fragments of what he had seen, creatures that moved like shadows, that whispered without sound, that showed him things from his past, twisted moments of regret and fear brought to life again and again. He said they fed on it, learned from it, made it part of them. Kira sent everything to Earth Command and waited, but the Leviathan had already begun preparing defensive systems, not just weapons, but shields layered with data filters designed to block psychological interference, to protect the crew from what might come next. Because something had changed, the Watchers knew the Leviathan now. They had seen its strength, and they were curious. They had sent a signal of their own, and now they were coming. Not with fleets, not with fire, but with memory. And the Leviathan would face them not just as a weapon, but as a guardian of all those who had been forgotten. The ship turned slowly toward the dark quadrant where no light reached, where the Watchers had built their world of sorrow and silence. And it moved forward without fear, without question, because this was the mission now, not diplomacy, not defense, but truth. And the truth was waiting in the dark. The Leviathan moved slowly toward the dark quadrant where stars vanished in an endless black, where light refused to live and silence pressed against the hull. Like a heavy ocean, Kira sat in the command seat, her hands resting on the console, her mind racing with thoughts of Watchers, forgotten ships, and the man who now slept under deep scan, his mind still drifting through broken memories. Earth Command had authorized full exploration with extreme caution. They sent warnings to nearby colonies, told them to avoid long-range scans in this sector, told them to remain quiet, and still, as if hiding from something that might wake if disturbed. The Watchers had not followed, but their signal had changed. It was no longer just a whisper. It was now a slow rhythm, a soundless beat, like footsteps in a dream. It pulsed through the dark quadrant, guiding the Leviathan closer. With each moment, not a trap, not a lure, but something more ancient, something that expected them. The ship passed through a graveyard of vessels, old and new alien and human broken wrecks floated in silence, torn apart by forces unknown, their hulls marked with the same strange vein seen before, like the metal itself had tried to escape, some cracked in ways no weapon could cause, as if time had been around them and left them shattered in place. Kira studied them all, each one telling a different story. Some had fought back, some had surrendered, some had simply vanished from history. Without warning now, they rested here in the dark, under the gaze of something that did not forget. The crew remained small and silent. The survivors from the colony watched the screens with wide eyes, the rescued pilot still in recovery, mumbling about watchers, about the feeling of being seen, through about dreams that felt like memories, but were not as Kira felt it too, a presence not on the sensors, not in the air, but inside her thoughts, as if the Leviathan itself had become part of something larger, something watching back. Then they saw it. The structure was not a station, not a ship. It floated like a mountain in space, vast and still shaped like a spiral wrapped around a black sphere that absorbed all light. No doors, no lights, no weapons, only form and presence. The Leviathan scanned and found no life, no energy, no signals except the pulse that now came from its center, slow and steady like a heartbeat echoing through time. Kira approached carefully the Leviathan, adjusting its path with perfect gray sensors, wide open, weapons armed. But quiet, the ship sent a probe and waited. The small device drifted closer past the outer edges of the spiral, then vanished, not destroyed, not jammed, simply gone like it had never been there. Another probe met the same fate, then a third. Then Kira made a decision. She sent a message to Earth Command, told them what they had found, told them she was going, and told them not to send others until she returned, or the Leviathan fell silent. The ship moved forward, its hull adapting to strange ways of distortion, its systems bending reality just enough to slip between what was and what should not be. The black sphere grew larger until it filled the main screen. Then everything changed. The Leviathan stopped moving, but it had not slowed time around. It had frozen, not for the crew, not for the systems, but for space itself. Stars froze, light held still, particles stopped drifting, as if the entire quadrant had been paused by an unseen force. Then the visions began. Kira saw Earth, but not her Earth. She saw it burned and broken, cities crushed by impossible storms, skies blackened by unknown forces, oceans turned to steam. She saw humanity not as it was, but as it might be, scattered, hunted, silent. She saw the Leviathan drifting through ruined space, alone and forgotten, its purpose lost, its name erased. She heard voices, but not words, memories, but not hers, pain and joy wrapped together like fire and ice. She saw herself standing among strangers, creatures who looked at her with recognition and fear. She saw hands reaching toward her in hope and in rage. Then it stopped. Time moved again, space returned to motion, and the Leviathan stood just outside the black sphere, untouched, unharmed, but not unchanged. The ship began to shift its systems, adapting its core, processing data. No one had sent it, spoke not in words, but in feelings and waves of emotion that filled the bridge with warmth, sorrow, courage, and resolve. The watchers had seen them, they had tested them, and now they waited. Kira ordered a full scan of the crew, all stable, no damage, no interference, but everyone reported dreams, strange and vivid, some joyful, others terrifying, images of other lives, other places. Some saw lost loved ones, others saw things they could not describe, but all of them felt the same thing: after purpose, as if the watchers had shown them what could come, what might happen if no one stood in the way. Earth Command received the data and responded with silence for hours. Then came a single order: continue. The Leviathan began to move again, circling the spiral structure, gathering more scans, analyzing the impossible, trying to understand what the watchers were, what they wanted, if they were threat or warning or simply witness. Then the structure opened. Not like a door or a hatch, it simply changed, space folded, and the Leviathan was drawn inside, not pulled, not trapped, simply allowed to enter like a guest or a student. The ship floated through endless corridors of light, and dark shapes moved along the edges, but never came close, some large, some small, some that seemed to vanish as soon as noticed. At the center of it all was a chamber filled with memory walls covered in glowing strands, each one pulsing with light, each one holding a story, not written, not spoken, but lived. The Leviathan connected and received them all, flashes of countless worlds rising and falling, species lost to pride, to silence, to greed, stories of hope crushed and Hope Reborn watchers had seen it all, recorded it all, carried it all forward, not to judge, not to change, but to preserve. The Leviathan became part of that memory, not just as a visitor, but as a guardian chosen not by strength alone, but by choice, by the decision to stand when silence was safer, to fight when peace was false, to carry the truth, even when no one believed. Kira stood in the chamber surrounded by light, and knew she had become more than a pilot, more than a scout. She had become a voice of a forgotten Earth, now remembered by the stars, now seen by those who watched without end. And the Watchers gave her one final message, not in words, but in vision, a future path lit by fire and steel, a warning and a promise. Because they knew what was coming. And now, so did she. The Leviathan moved through the spiral structure in silence, its hull brushing against waves of unknown energy, its engines humming low and steady. The chamber behind them faded slowly into the distance, a fading light that now lived inside the ship, and the minds of those who stood aboard. Kira remained at the command deck, her thoughts heavy with the final vision given to her by the Watchers, the image of a storm not made of fire or wind, but of steel and silence and fear. Something was coming, not just for Earth, but for everything that dared to call the stars home. Earth Command waited on the edge of signal range, silent and patient and unsure of what they had just witnessed. Their sensors failed to capture the true nature of the event. Only the Leviathan's own data offered clues, fragments of vision and memory impossible to store and impossible to forget. Kira sent them everything and asked for nothing. She knew now that their mission had changed, their role had evolved. They were no longer explorers or soldiers or diplomats. They were witnesses to something ancient and guardians of something new. The survivors from the lost colony now walked the halls of a Leviathan with steady feet and wide eyes. Their fear had turned into purpose. They had seen the Watchers, they had been seen in return, and now they whispered stories to the crew, stories of silence, broken by light, stories of voices that touched the soul, not the ears, stories of being remembered. Even when the world had turned away, the rescued scout from Solark 7 was stronger now, his body healing faster than expected. His eyes held knowledge that frightened even him, and yet he smiled often and told Kira that the Watchers had not saved him, they had tested him, and he had passed. The Leviathan soon found itself at the edge of the spiral, the outer rim that touched space as the known galaxy understood it. Beyond that line, the stars returned, the systems responded, the universe resumed its ordinary rhythm. But something was different in the deep scans. The ship found a fleet moving fast, and without pause, not Thexery, not human, and not of any known registry. Their signals were coded with dark energy, bursts, their shapes crude and functional, their patterns strange and shifting. They did not travel in straight lines, they bent space around them as they moved like predators that shaped the path behind their prey. Earth Command warned of multiple colony disappearances, all silent, all without distress calls. Sensors failed near those sectors, and only echo signals remained. A pattern emerged, all of them moved toward a single line, a route that intersected with Earth in less than 2 cycles. Kira looked at the path and understood this was not coincidence, this was a hunt, and the Leviathan was the only vessel fast enough, smart enough, and brave enough to stand in its way. She gathered the crew in the central chamber where the Leviathan's core glowed with soft pulses, each one syncing with their thoughts. The Watchers had left something behind, not a weapon, not a tool, but a seed of memory, a code buried in emotion. And Light, the ship, now knew how to protect, not with force alone, but with knowledge, with defense woven from what had come before. Kira showed them the vision again, the path of ruin, the storm of steel, the silence that followed. Then she asked them to choose, and every voice answered without fear. The Leviathan jumped into dark space where the enemy passed. No beacons, no support, no certainty, just trust in the Watchers. And in each other, they found the first lost colony. In ruins, no bodies, no wreckage, just absence, as if life had never touched the soil. The buildings stood perfect, and still the machines hummed and blinked, but no one lived there anymore, only shadows on the walls and strange markings on the floor like fingerprints burned into reality. Then came the second and the third, all the same, all untouched by violence, yet destroyed in spirit. Then they saw it. A ship larger than the Leviathan, shaped like a spear wrapped in shadow, its hull covered in moving plates that shifted like breathing skin. It saw them and did not attack. It scanned and watched, and then turned away. It continued on its path toward Earth, uninterested in words or warning or wonder. Kira followed. It waited for an opening, but there was none. The enemy moved without fear, without hesitation. It had no escort, no shield, no signal, just intent behind it came more not identical, but similar twisted forms of metal and hunger and army, without purpose but one: to consume. The Leviathan moved into position. It charged its main weapon, a core pulse wrapped in energy and memory, and launched it at the lead vessel. The impact was massive. Space twisted around the blast, and silence followed for a moment. It seemed enough. Then the enemy ship reformed, its damage folding inward, as if it had not mattered at all that it turned. The battle began. Without a sound, weapons fired, beams struck, shields broke. The Leviathan danced through space with perfect grace, its AI predicting every move, its crew working like one mind. But the enemy adapted, learned. Each strike it endured made it stronger. Each tactic repeated became useless. Then Kira realized something. The Watchers had not given them a weapon to win. They had given them a story to understand. The enemy was not just metal. It was memory, twisted and hungry. It fed on fear, on repetition, on regret. It grew from what was not faced. So she did the unthinkable. She ordered the Leviathan to stop. The ship froze and opened its systems, not to attack, but to share. It sent every memory of the spiral of the Watchers, of the pain and hope and choice, and it sent them without fear, without hiding, without shame. The enemy paused. Its weapons dimmed. Its shape flickered and changed for one breath of space-time. It hesitated. Then it screamed, not in sound, but in force. A pulse of dark light hit the Leviathan, shaking its core. But the ship held strong. It pushed back, not with fire, but with truth. And something broke. The enemy fleet paused and fractured. Two ships collided and vanished. One turned and fled. The lead vessel pulsed, once, then twice, then folded in on itself, disappearing into a whole knot of this universe. And just like that, they were gone. The crew sat in silence. The ship drifted. Still the stars returned, and the storm had passed for now. Kira closed her eyes and saw the spiral. Once more saw the Watchers, not watching, but resting now at peace, for they had not chosen warriors, they had chosen storytellers. And the story was far from over. The Leviathan hovered near the edge of deep space, where the stars dimmed into a quiet sea, and gravity no longer held meaning. The battle had passed, the silence had returned, but the crew knew something had changed forever. Kira stood in the command deck, her eyes fixed on the vast emptiness before them, her thoughts spiraling through memories, both hers and not hers. The ship around her no longer felt like metal and wires. It felt like a living memory, forged from the hopes of 100 forgotten worlds and the strength of one unshaken voice. Reports came, and slowly Earth Command confirmed that the enemy fleet had vanished, their signals gone, their patterns erased. Not one trace remained of the warships that had once shadowed the stars. The colonies, once lost, had not been restored, but the fear had lifted, as if a curtain had been pulled back to reveal light. Waiting on the other side, survivors across distant systems began to speak again. Transmissions flowed, stories passed through every channel of a ship that faced the darkness and did not fall, a ship that chose to remember instead of run. The Watchers said nothing, but the Leviathan now spoke in a new way. Its systems hummed with a pulse deeper than before. Each crew member felt it in their bones, not fear, not command, but understanding, like the ship itself had awakened from a dream and now walked among them, not as a tool, but as a guide. Kira moved through the ship alone, corridors lit by soft waves of color, the walls no longer cold, they pulsed with warmth like breath. Waiting to speak, her mind wandered to the scout who still slept under care, his dreams now calm as mind, no longer whispering warnings. He had seen the spiral and come back, not broken, but changed. He would wake with knowledge no human had held before, and he would speak when the time was right. In the Leviathan's central core chamber, Kira met the others, her officers, her crew, her friends. They stood in silence, not in fear, but in unity. They had traveled through memory and war. They had faced something older than history and come out alive, not because they were stronger, but because they were willing to listen, to change, to remember. The Leviathan showed them a path, not in maps or routes, but in feeling a direction across the stars, where echoes still cried out, where Watchers once stood before fading into myth, and where others now needed what Earth had learned, the mission had changed not by force, but by choice. They would no longer wait for warnings. They would seek the silence and fill it with story, with memory, with light. Earth Command hesitated only for a moment when Kira sent the final transmission, a request not for permission, but for trust. The Leviathan would leave chart its own path, guided not by orders, but by the purpose the Watchers had shown. The response came with one line: "We trust you," then silence. The crew prepared for long travel, systems optimized, engines calibrated, supplies checked, and minds focused. They were not explorers, they were not conquerors, they were not diplomats. They were something new, a vessel of memory, a ship built not to destroy, but to carry stories, to light up forgotten corners of the galaxy with the truth of what had been seen and felt and survived. As the Leviathan powered up, its chorus sound filled the ship, not music, not noise, but something in between, a rhythm that wrapped around the heart of song, without words, that each crew member heard in their own way, some as laughter, some as sorrow, some as a promise. It was the voice of the Watchers, not as gods or ghosts, but as echoes of choice, reminding them that every star holds a story and every silence holds a question. The ship began to move, space bending around it as it slipped between dimensions, not with speed alone, but with intent. The stars outside blurred into a stream of thought, time no longer measured in seconds, but in choices, in feelings, and visions that came like dreams painted across the dark. In one such vision, Kira saw Earth as it might be, cities powered by harmony, not greed, people united by shared memory, not fear, children learning not just facts, but stories of those who stood when others fell. She saw the Leviathan returning not in fire, but in welcome, a beacon of hope made real by courage. Then she saw other worlds, some wounded, some empty, some burning, and in each one she saw a light spark, as if the ship itself had touched them with a story, with a voice that said, "You are not forgotten, and you are not alone." The Watchers faded not because they were gone, but because their purpose had been passed on. The Leviathan was no longer just a name. It was a legacy, a choice of voice in the dark that chose to speak when silence was safer. And so the journey continued across galaxies, across time, not to fight, not to flee, but to remember and to help others remember too. Because sometimes the greatest weapon is not fire or steel. It is memory and the courage to carry it forward.